Hi everyone, welcome along to our press conference today. For those of you joining us online, welcome to you too. My name is David McNeil, I'm your coordinator today. As probably most of you know, the Olympics were due to start this week, in fact, before being derailed by the COVID crisis. And the organization Human Rights Watch has taken this opportunity to come to the FCCJ and discuss a very disturbing report alleging that there has been widespread physical, sexual and verbal abuse of children and child athletes in Japan. It's a large report, it's 67 pages long, and the title is, "I was hit so many times I could not count." It categorizes the abuse of child athletes in Japan, and documents Japan's history of corporal punishment, or what we call taibatsu in Japan, in sport, and finds abuse in training throughout Japanese schools, federations, and elite sports. I've just been talking to Kobayashi-san, one of today's speakers, and she has pointed out that since 1983, 121 children have been killed playing judo in this country, and one of the aims of her association has been to reduce that to nearly zero. Human Rights Watch wants, the recommendation is the establishment of a Japan Center for Safe Sport, an independent administrative body which would address child abuse in sport and ensure reporting and tracking of complaints, establish remedies for athletes and parents, and deter child abuse by identifying and decertifying abusive coaches. So I'll get out of the way and just introduce my speakers. The first one, of course, is well known to the FCCJ. That's Doi-san, Kanae Doi. She is the Japan Director of Human Rights Watch. The second speaker is Keiko Kobayashi. She is with the Japan Judo Accident Victims Association, which campaigns against child abuse in the sport and represents families who have been children who have suffered abuse in the sport, including, incidentally, her own son, which she will talk about. And then the third speaker is Takuya Yamazaki. He's a sports lawyer and executive committee member of World Players Association. Can you switch off your mobile phones if you haven't already done so, please, just to avoid disturbing the speakers. Doi-san, yoroshiku onegai shimasu.
Thank you very much. Greetings, everyone. My name is Kanae Doi, Japan Director for Human Rights Watch. Human Rights Watch is one of the largest global human rights organizations with its headquarters in New York. We monitor human rights situation of more than 100 countries around the world. On July 20th, ahead of the one-year countdown of the Tokyo 2020 Olympics and Paralympics Games, Human Rights Watch released a 67-page report titled, "I was hit so many times I can't count. Abuse of child athletes in Japan." This report documents Japan's history of corporal punishment in sport, known as taibatsu in Japanese, and found that child abuse is still rampant in sports training throughout Japanese schools, federations, and elite sports. Human Rights Watch Sports and Human Rights team has done reports on Olympics in the past for Beijing 2008, London 2012, Sochi 2014, and Brazil 2016. Human Rights Watch regularly engage with sports bodies like FIFA and the IOC to engage them to adopt human rights policies. While the topic of child abuse in sport today is a global problem, we chose to focus on Japan for 2020 because the Olympics and Paralympics are coming to Japan. And we knew, and every Japanese know, unfortunately, that corporal punishment, known as taibatsu, has been prevalent in Japanese sports. Youth sports bring many benefits and can contribute to a lifetime benefit in terms of health and well-being. However, this Human Rights Watch new report shows that abuse 体罰in particular, are still rampant in both grassroots and elite sports. We spoke directly to more than 50 athletes, many of whom experienced 体罰, along with verbal and sexual abuse. We also conducted an online survey of 757 athletes from more than 50 sports in 45 prefectures from March to June of this year. Out of these 757 respondents, 381 respondents were 24 or younger. These are not just elite athletes, but also from grassroots sports. We interviewed parents, academics, child protection experts, lawyers, government officials, and sports federation leaders. We spoke to team managers and coaches who experienced abuse as children. Some of them are committed to change these practices and make sports safe for the next generations. The testimonies of those who spoke to in the report are very shocking. The report title is "I was hit so many times I cannot count." This was taken from a testimony by an elite athlete in his 20s who experienced regular and repeated 体罰 by his high school coach in Western Japan. He said, "The coach would often slap us. It was normal for him to punch us in the stomach and kick us. He often threw players like in judo. This would happen in many practices, but not all. When a player would make a mistake in a play, the coach would slap or punch or kick or throw the player. This coach physically abused me countless times. I would estimate more, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 times. Once he punched, he would hit several times. He didn't stop after only one time." We have used pseudonyms, including this athlete, because in many cases, they did not want to shame the coaches who abused them, because those coaches mistakenly believed beating and verbal abuse would create champions. Abuse we documented includes punching, slapping, kicking, or striking with objects. Out of 381 young respondents of our survey, 19% indicated they experienced punching, slapping, kicking, or striking with objects. Another feature was excessive or insufficient food and water. Out of the 381 young respondents to our survey, 24% said that they were forced to eat excessive amount of food, and then 7% said they were not provided enough food or water. Another experience athletes has shared with us was they were forced to train when they were injured or punished with excessive training. 22% of young athletes said so. And also cutting or shaving hair as a punishment was also prevalent. 6% of young respondents experienced this. Abuse by older teammates, senpai, was also common. Each of these were sections in this report. For athletes who were assaulted, sexually abused, or harassed by coaches, many are suffering from depression, physical disabilities, and lifelong trauma as a result. Our findings about the system that allows these abuses are: one is that Japan's reform announced in 2013 was far short of international and Olympic standards. And even so, they have not been implemented. Another is that there is no comprehensive tracking of child athlete abuse in Japan. No one is even bothering to count the number of abuse complaints or cases. There is a poor articulation of legal rights of athletes and the legal responsibilities of sports organizations. Athletes do not understand their rights and so are fearful to report abuse. What reporting system there are, they are largely inaccessible to young athletes. there is a lack of victim support infrastructure and a culture of impunity for abusive coaches. Of child athlete interviewees who experienced abuse, all but one reported that there were no consequences for the coach. In sum, our findings indicate that if you are a child or athlete being abused by a coach in Japan, you would struggle to report the abuse to sports federations or the government and get assistance. And if you did, it would probably end your career in sport. While the 2020 Games now delayed for a year due to the pandemic, Human Rights Watch is calling on Japan to take decisive action and to lead in tackling this global crisis of athlete abuse in sport. Among others, we recommend the Japanese government should explicitly ban any form of abuse as a coaching technique, and then establish a Japan Center for Safe Sport, an independent administrative body tasked solely with addressing child abuse in sport. This body should have the responsibility to create and maintain standards for athletes' protection and should serve as the central authority for investigating abuse claims and punishing abusive coaches. In Japan, society started to pay attention to child abuse, or 子どもの虐待, in the past decades, and policymakers have started reform to respond to this child abuse crisis. This reform started from abuse in home, but it has not reached yet to sports. Well, we have not been eradicated abuse, but made significant policy and social norm changes in the past decades in the areas such as child abuse in home, 体罰 and いじめ bullying at school, and harassment at work. When I was a child, 体罰 corporal punishment at school and at home were normal and everywhere. When I was a young worker 20 years ago, verbal abuse, pressure to work for almost 24 hours, now known as power harassment, was just a norm. But policy reform changed the decades-long norms and values in these areas. So I would like to conclude by saying that with the energy and the international attention Tokyo 2020 Olympics and Paralympics bring to Japan, we can kick abuse out of sport. After one year, when Tokyo 2020 starts, I wish Japan will be proud of its reform to protect its own children from abuse in sport and embrace this reform as an important and lasting legacy of Tokyo 2020. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doi-san. Kobayashi-san,
はい、
お願いします。
はい、全国柔道事故被害者の会の小林と申します。
Hello, my name is Kobayashi of the Japan Judo Accident Victims Association.
私の息子は中学校で柔道部に所属していました。
And my son was a member of the judo club at his junior high school.
中学3年の時、柔道部顧問からある高校のスポーツ推薦を勧められました。しかし、息子はその勧めを断り、別の高校に進学を決めました。すると、顧問は柔道場で柔道技を使って息子を痛めつけました。
When my son was in the third year of junior high school, the coach of the judo club advised that he could recommend my son for a high school based on his high judo abilities. However, my son said no to this recommendation and decided instead to go to a different high school. But then the coach used judo techniques on him at the dojo or the judo hall and hurt my son.
息子は気管を締める締め技で2回も締め落とされ、フラフラな状態のままさらに投げられ、脳に大出血を起こしました。
So using a chokehold, which is a judo technique, the coach strangled my son twice, strangled his windpipe twice, which made him very dizzy. He then threw him to the floor in that state, causing him to suffer massive bleeding in the brain.
手術で奇跡的に助かりましたが、息子の脳には重い障害が残りました。
So miraculously, the life of my son was saved through surgery. However, his brain is still severely damaged.
警察は顧問を傷害罪で書類送検しました。
So at the time, the police did file papers to charge the coach of inflicting bodily injury.
しかし検察は不起訴にしました。
However, the prosecutor dropped these charges and they did not indict.
柔道場で柔道着を着て柔道技を使えばどこまでが柔道でどこからが犯罪か区別できないという理由です。
And the reason for this is that they said, well, if it happens in the dojo, wearing judo clothes and using judo techniques, then we cannot distinguish between what is judo and what is a crime.
教育委員会も全国柔道連盟も息子の受けた虐待を運の悪い事故として片付け、加害教諭を一切処罰していません。彼は今も中学教師として働き、柔道指導を続けています。
So both the Board of Education and the All Japan Judo Federation dismissed the abuse which I suffered as just having been an accident of bad luck. The perpetrator was not punished at all, and in fact he still works as a junior high school teacher and still continues to coach judo.
日本では記録が残っている1983年からこれまでに柔道で死亡した中高生は121人に上ります。しかもこれには一般道場の死亡は含まれていません。
In Japan, the records of the number of junior and senior high school students who have died in judo have been made since 1983. And these records now show that 121 such students have lost their lives. However, this number does not even include those deaths which occurred outside of schools, such as those which occur at regular dojos.
ましてや柔道で障害者になった子どもたちの総数は全く調査されていません。日本では長年運の悪い事故として片付けてきたからです。
And on top of this, there has been absolutely no research done in Japan on the total number of children who have incurred disabilities as a result of or through judo. And this is because Japan has long dismissed such cases as, in my case, as just being an accident of bad luck.
私は海外での柔道事故を知りたくて、フランス、イギリス、オーストラリア、アメリカなどの柔道連盟や関係者に問い合わせました。
I wanted to know about the cases of judo accidents in other countries. So I myself contacted the judo federations and officials in other countries, including France, the UK, Australia, and the United States.
するとどの国でも少なくともこの20年間亡くなった子どもは一人もいませんでした。
And through this, I found out that no child had died in any of these countries in judo for at least the last 20 years.
さらに海外には柔道を安全に指導するためのしっかりとした施策があることも知りました。
Through this, I also learned that in these other countries there are solid measures in place so that judo can be taught safely.
日本では今も柔道事故が起こり続けています。
In Japan, judo accidents continue to occur even now.
昨年も小学校5年生が亡くなりました。
Last year, another fifth grader died.
小学4年生が重篤な障害者になっています。
And a fourth grader also became seriously disabled.
発達障害のあるお子さんが何人もさらなる障害を負いました。
A number of children who are living with developmental disabilities have also suffered even further disabilities on top of this as a result of such cases.
海外の施策を参考にすることで、日本でも子どもを安全に指導することは実現可能です。
By learning from the policies which are in place in other countries, it is possible to teach children judo safely in Japan as well.
死亡する子どもをゼロにできると強く信じています。
I strongly believe that it is possible to reduce the number of children dying in judo in Japan also to zero.
Thank you for giving me time to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Kobayashi-san. Kobayashi-san, would you mind just saying, if you don't mind, how old is your son now?
現在の息子さんはいくつ聞いてもよろしいですか？
今、15歳の時に怪我をして、今15年経って30歳です。でも一生障害というのは一生抱えていかなければいけません。非常に重い障害です。
So my son was 15 at the time of the accident. 15 years have passed since then, so he is now 30 years old. However, the disabilities he is living with are very severe, and he will be living with them for his entire life.
Thank you. That's a tragic story. Yamazaki-san, お願いします。
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Taka Yamazaki. I'm a sports lawyer. I've been working for the sports industry for more than 20 years, mainly representing players. First of all, I'd like to thank Human Rights Watch for this initiative. It's really kind of a historic project. And the significance of this project is that the Human Rights Watch took this issue as a human rights problem. Very few people on the ground in Japan are aware that this is a human rights problem. And as you rightly pointed out, Kanae-san, it's been socially accepted. And many parents are even kind of thankful for this kind of corporal punishments. I think the real problem here is that we have accepted this practice, and this is due to our culture or social norm, or I would say hierarchical culture in Japan. And actually, I have met many kind of coaches during my career or sports lawyer's career, but they don't really have kind of a malicious intent. They just want to, they are just keen on developing good children or good players, and that makes it really kind of complicated. So, but I think that this report is not aiming to criticize any particular person. This is to encourage all of the people to make a change, make a real change, which we have failed so far. To take advantage of this opportunity 1 year ahead, 1 year before the Olympics. So the problem is what we should do moving forward. I think we need to do two things. So one is as was suggested in this report by Human Rights Watch. One is to establish an effective remedy where children or stakeholders can report the abuse. And the effective protection of the reporters is absolutely necessary. So we can refer to some of the best practices in foreign countries like U.S. Safe Sports Center or something like that. So Human Rights Watch, rightly pointed out that we need to have established some kind of a Japan Center for Safe Sports, which I strongly agree. But the other important thing we need to do is to have a dialogue on the ground to make a real change. So due to the hierarchical relationship, it's been absolutely difficult for people, especially for children or for even parents or management people of the federation, to say that it has to change to the established coaches. There are many established coaches, and they are well respected, and therefore it's really difficult to say something against the coaches. And actually, they are, in a sense, really good in bringing up children. However, the methodology is wrong, right? So the way they are doing is not accepted anymore. So we need to have that kind of a notion, and we need to have a courage to say that we need to make a change, a real change. And in order to do this, we need to create the atmosphere where we can have a kind of a positive dialogue to talk about this issue. This is, actually difficult under the Japanese culture, but I believe we can change. It might take time, but now is a really good chance to do it. So I would like to encourage all of the people, including myself, to have a courage to listen to others with mutual respect, and we need to understand that this type of practice has to be abolished, and this is absolutely harmful for children. Although many of the established coaches are just keen on bringing up good children, but the way they are doing is absolutely harmful. So this is something which we need to be aware of. So that's a really important thing. So, and also I would like to point out, highlight another interesting movement in the global sports, named Business and Human Rights in Sports. So Human Rights Watch has been really active on this field. I'm sitting on the executive board of the World Press Association. World Press Association is a member of Center for Sports and Human Rights. So for FIFA or IOC, that type of international federations now are really keen on, complying with the basic principles of the business and human rights. So there is principle of business and human rights made by United Nations. So IOC, FIFA, and Tokyo Olympic 2020 organizing committees have already declared that they would be in line with the principles, basic principles of business and human rights. So in order to realize the value of human rights on the ground, we need to have an effective dialogue. So stakeholder engagement is absolutely the key to realize this notion. So however, as I said, under this culture, under this Japanese culture, what is missing is a dialogue. So under this hierarchical relationship, senior people can control everything. And the all of the non-senior people or non-management people cannot have a say in the decision-making process. So by taking advantage of this opportunity, I'd like to encourage all of the stakeholders in sports to establish an effective dialogue where we can have where we can talk about the what is good for children. So that is absolutely necessary. And if we have an effective dialogue on the ground, I believe we can make a change. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Yamazaki-san. There was a case, wasn't there, just I'll back to the first question, two years ago when an American football player, if you recall, carried out an illegal tackle on another player. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the foreign reporters in Japan were quite surprised by the amount of attention that story got, because it didn't seem like a huge story. And I remember writing about it and saying, well, this shows that this issue has touched a nerve in Japanese society because of the problem of bullying in sport. And a lot of us sort of seem to think that was a watershed moment 2 years ago. Do you think it was, that American football incident?
It was absolutely a good opportunity to remedy the problem. However, that problem was used for a political purpose, so which is really shame to me. So there have been many scandals actually. So many of the corporal punishments has been highlighted over the last 10 years, I think, especially in 2013, where when young basketball players committed suicide. However, due to the hierarchical relationship or hierarchical structure, no one can really say to the established coaches that we need to make a change. So what happened after that was that they actually said, we're going to take zero tolerance approach for any type of physical abuse or corporal punishment. However, they didn't set up an effective remedy to help to protect children. So they just say, or they just pretend to remedy the problem. But however, they actually didn't think that it's not really bad thing. So it's sometimes needed. So that's a kind of a real notion on the ground. So that's the kind of a root of the problem.
And did I understand you correctly? You said taibatsu is not banned. There's no law banning taibatsu. Is that right?
It's illegal. It's illegal. It's violence. Yeah.
Yeah. In
So
fact, I mean, very recently there was a legal reform to explicitly ban taibatsu in some areas, but it doesn't explicitly refers to sports.
Ah,
But interpretation of the law is that it's prohibited everywhere.
okay.
Yeah. So the problem is the interpretation of the laws. So it's been intentionally, kind of blurred or vague by the management people. So because many people want to protect the established coaches, or they don't have a courage to say something against the established coaches. So that is why they, their interpretation has been really vague.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's why one of the main recommendations of Human Rights Watch is that the Japanese government needs to make explicit in their laws that their taibatsu is prohibited in sports too.
Okay. Right, thank you very much. Well, we have 25 minutes for questions, so let me open it up to the floor. Anybody would like to ask a question, please give your name and your organization and ask away. Andy Sharp, お願いします.
Thank you for coming and giving your presentation. Much appreciated. It's Andy Sharp from the Nikkei Asian Review. Just a quick question. Obviously, the timing of this report is because of the Olympics ahead of that. I understand that. But as you all know, there are abuses in sports across the world. We had the US gymnastics situation. I hear about Canadian junior ice hockey is really, really bad, for example, and there's many other cases. So how would you compare Japan to other countries around the world in terms of the way it treats its children during sports training, in terms of, and what is the level of abuse compared with other countries in the world? Maybe Doi-san can answer that one best.
And then also Yamazaki-sensei can also answer to that.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And as I said in the speech, I think it is a global problem. And then also Human Rights Watch is also currently dealing not only with Japan situation, but also situation in US, Haiti, Afghanistan, and so on. So I wouldn't pretend that this is a uniquely Japanese problem. Having said that, to me, what is striking is the lack of systematic response to this situation. As Yamazaki-sensei just now said, that there has been statements that their corporal punishments are prohibited, and then they have to eradicate. However, for such a long time, there is really no systematic response to for the laws or for the organizations for remedies and so on. And then also there is absolutely a shocking lack of efforts to track cases. So it is Human Rights Watch tried hard to compare the tendency, whether the abuse is in decline or it is in increase in the past 10 years, for example. But we were not able to do so because there is no comprehensive or comparable data. And then we found so many abuses still happening in recent years, we couldn't conclude that it is in decline. So I would say that there, in the case of Japan, the efforts of authorities to address this problem has been lacking, and then that needs to be addressed in the next 1 year.
So if I may add something, I think, yeah, it's a global problem. And the reason why it's been a global problem is because of excessive commercialization of sports industry. So the excessive commercialization of the sports industry has has made a really kind of a crucial, bad environment for children, for excessive competitions in the early ages, in youth ages. So this is a global problem. So that is why, for example, New Zealand, they taken a really interesting approach. So they said the balance is better. So they doing kind of a campaign or initiative named Balance is Better. So based on the approach is kind of an evidence-based approach. So based on the scientific research, excessive training in the early age is really harmful for children. So that's their finding. So and also another good example is in Norway. So they prohibit any type of international competitions until the age of 12. So no children can compete in the international competitions until 12 years old. So that type of practice are there. However, I think one of the biggest differences between those countries and Japan is that many of the sports in Japan have been played in the context of education. So school sports is really huge. And the teacher have kind of a discretion or autonomy to think about what is the best way to educate students. So it's not really kind of a player, it's just students who needs education. So that is a part of the reason why this type of practice has been kind of exempted from criminal laws or relevant laws, which clearly says illegal. It is illegal based on the Japanese laws. Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions on the floor? Dozo.
フランスの、リベラション新聞と、ラジオフランスラジオ局の、特派員西村と申します。一点の質問あります。例えば虐待を受けている子どもまたは虐待を見た大人は児童相談所に相談できる仕組みがあるんですけれども、スポーツの場合は何か同じような場所はありますか？
I am from France Radio. My name is Nishimura. I have one question. In the case of children who are suffering from abuse in other contexts or other adults who witness abuse of children and so on, there are the official windows to which they can go as a consultation place for these kinds of abuse. However, I would like to ask if there is a specific also mechanism in place within sports.
Thank you very much. Conceptually, abuses in sports also can be reported to Jido Sodanjo, Children's Guidance Center. However, I don't think it is happening very often, or I would say it rarely happens. I think partly because of the perception of parents and then children that their taibatsu is necessary. They were forced to believe that the taibatsu is necessary to make them strong athletes. That's one response to your question. But also because of but I would say that the sports organizations and also Japanese government has started a reform in 2013 when there was a very tragic suicide case happened. And then after, in this reform, there has been set up some hotlines, particularly for national sports federations. So, and then also JOC has one, and then J-Sport has one. So again, theoretically, or also in some cases in practice, children who suffer abuse can report to those hotlines. But in our report, we investigated extensively on those hotlines. It is very, very difficult for young athletes to access. Because, first, the system is very, very complicated. The section is named as incomplete and dispersed investigation systems, inaccessible reporting systems. So, there is no one easy access, complaint system in Japan. So all federations set up different systems, and then the government doesn't mandate those federations to set up a hotline, or if they set up one, what kind of hotline that needs to be. So it's varied. So it's very, very difficult to navigate. And then also even our student interns who are really highly educated people, they investigated into those hotlines, and then sometimes even they couldn't find it. And then sometimes the hotline is designated to a law firm. It is very difficult for young athletes to call law firm for their abuse. And then also the website says that and then also it is very difficult for athletes to report their own abuse to their own sports federations, because they fear retaliation. And then so JOC or JSPO, they are not the national federation themselves. It is good that those kind of other organizations have hotlines, but their website says for example JOC, they only accept elite athletes, and then for JSPO, the website they says that they may share their complaints with their own federations. So it's very, very anyway, very difficult for athletes reports abuse those national federations as well. And then it is not no one. We have interviewed more than 50 athletes, and then only one person knew about this system. So overall, really the complaint mechanism of Japanese sports is not at all functioning.
Yeah. So that is why Human Rights Watch is calling on truly independent remedy system. Yeah.
That's why we are calling on the Japanese government to set up Japan Safe Sports. Japan Center for Safe Sports, because there should be one channel for complaint, and then they should be accessible.
I guess if my son came home and said he had been hazed or hurt playing sports in school, I would just go down to the local police station and report the coach. Is that an option? Under the current law, the coach can be prosecuted, right?
Yeah, but as she rightly pointed out, the problem is, to what extent it can be exempted due to the sporting context, right? So that's the difficulty.
Right.
Yeah.
We have a question from an online caller here. So this is from, his name is Aaron Miller, and he is with the University of California, Berkeley. And he has written a book called Discourses of Discipline, an Anthropology of Corporal Punishment. He says, there's a critical question: why didn't your report consult more anthropological studies on this topic, which considered the nuance that is involved in this issue? He says there are countless Japanese language studies that take a more nuanced look at this subject. Your report doesn't give them the attention they deserve. Do you want to answer that question? So he's basically saying your report lacks nuance, I think, as far as I can tell from his question, because it doesn't consult Japanese language sources enough.
Yeah, I think this is kind of related to what I said earlier. So I think the context is really important, or nuance is really important, because under our culture, the context is always important. So we need to read the atmosphere all the time, and so that is why it's really hard for stakeholders to have a courage to report what's actually happening.
Right.
So, but as I said, the few coaches, of course, her example is absolutely unacceptable. It's absolutely, just a violence. However, many of the coaches, don't really have a, malicious intent. So they just, passionate in growing up good child or good players. So we need to understand the complexity of the problem. So they strongly believe that they are facing the problem. They are, looking at the children really closely, and then they think it is absolutely necessary at the moment. However, we can hardly say to those kind of believers that now it's not allowed, or we need to make a change. It can be done in a different way. So that's something which we needed to tell them. However, of course, we need to make a research, make maybe psychological research or more kind of a high context type of research. But I think the best solution to tackle this problem is to have a dialogue. On one hand, we need to respect them. Of course, what they are doing is wrong. However, they don't really have a malicious intent. So we need to pay a kind of a certain respect to them. Mm-hmm. However, at the same time, we need to, on the other hand, we need to deliver the right message to for example, established cultures. Mm-hmm. So that type of social, cultural context is something which we need to be aware of. I'm not sure I'm answering the question correctly, but yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Doi-san?
Yeah. I don't know. Nuances are important, but while we are talking about human rights of children, so we are really talking about the minimum standards, the legal standards, which the government and the adults needs to follow. So here, I'm not telling that the coaches have malicious intent, or I talked about the child abuse at home or at school, like taibats at school, or harassment at work. These were very big problems. Still, a big problem in Japan, but the policy reform has changed the practices significantly. And then in these cases as well, many of the parents who are punishing their kids, or the teachers who are punishing the students, they didn't have malicious intent. So I think the situation is is kind of comparable to the situation of other children abuses, which are getting more attention from the government, and then the reform has started. So from human rights activist view, the sports in sports also this reform should be introduced, and if the policymakers sends the right messages and then makes a right reforms, also in sports the norms and values would change.
Thank you very much. Any more questions from the floor? どうぞ。
Hiroshi Hiyama from AFP. Thank you very much for coming. Two questions. Was there anything that surprised you while you were researching this project? You said that it is widely known problem, and that it was socially accepted, etc. And you talked about the lack of systematic response. Is it a uniquely Japanese phenomenon, do you think, or do you think that it is also a global problem? And also, Doi-san also mentioned earlier that social awareness about child abuse or domestic abuse or corporal punishment in classrooms have changed, have improved in the past 10 years, 20 years. I wonder if the same could be done here. And what led to this improved awareness of this child abuse or the corporal punishment, or resistance to corporal punishment in classroom? And the third question, if Kobayashi-san's case happened today, for example, could it have a different outcome? Do you think that things have changed over the past 15 years? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, there's three questions. That's going to keep you busy.
じゃあ maybe I will start. Yeah, what I was surprised doing this research was that the abuse is still very rampant. I was thinking that there may be much less abuses these days, although I am already, I'm not a kid at all. So when I was a kid, it was rampant, but maybe not these days. But our research showed that there are even very young athletes very young athletes still experience abuses. And then the second thing I was surprised was the seriousness of the abuse. Their teeth broken, blood in their mouth. These are abuses these days. We rarely hear at home, abuse at home, for example, or abuse in classrooms. If that happens, it's a scandal. Mm-hmm. But in sports, it's still happening regularly. So those, how widespread it is still, today, and also the seriousness was something I was struck as a activist who has watched child abuse very closely in the past years. And then, so about the systematic response, also in this report, we talked about the international movement for safe sport, and then responding to their own domestic crisis. U.S. has, as Yamazaki-sensei said, we talk in our report about the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, or UK has a similar system, Canada has one, and then also IOC has started their own reform to encourage their partners, domestic partners, to start reforms. So, so there are serious reforms in other parts of the world to tackle this problem, but Japan has been par to those counterparts. So Japan needs to start now in order to be one of the countries who can be proud that they have responded to this crisis before the Olympic Games. And then about Kobayashi-san's case, it's very difficult to, of course, tell what would happen if the situation is different. But if there is a serious, if there were serious reforms in Japan, and then the coaches were informed that their taibatsu type techniques are illegal, and then if they are instructed by law, and then the responses to other coaches has been serious, he would have informed that this would end his career as coach, and then therefore he wouldn't. It is a good opportunity that he wouldn't have resorted to that technique.
I think a lot of people will be astonished that the coach who hurt Kobayashi-san's son is still not only working but coaching children. That's right. Kind of amazing, no?
Right. Yes, that's also one of the issues we have closely investigated on, and then in this report we have one chapter saying impunity for abusive coaches. So because Japan doesn't have uniformed standards for children's protection. Therefore, they don't have uniform standards. The Japanese government doesn't have standards to discipline coaches. So it varies on federations to federations, and then they are very soft.
Okay. So if you look at the UK's child protection system, so that type of coaches cannot, coach anymore in other sports.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. Just a question that came to mind, which I wanted to ask you earlier, is judo an outlier? There are a lot of injuries in judo, and sumo obviously is another sport, isn't it? Which has a lot of violence. And whenever we do stories on sumo, we hear the same kind of responses from coaches and commentators, sometimes even from foreign commentators. They'll say tough love is part of the sports, right? Would that be correct to say? I mean, those are the worst, are they? Judo, sumo would be the worst examples, but there are others.
I can say that. Yeah, sumo is more kind of a complex one. It's of course it's a sport, but it's not just a sport. So it's a really kind of a culture. There are a lot of cultural elements associated with it. However, so as you may have seen, there have been a lot of corporal punishments in the context of sumo. So I can say it's one of the worst, sport.
Final question. So presumably if the Olympics are cancelled, which some people think may happen, does that affect at all your strategy going into the next year? I hate to ask, but I do have to. Would anybody like to answer that question?
Oh yeah. Well. If I may answer the question, it's absolutely not. It's the strategy is there, and even though the Olympic is cancelled, we need to take advantage of this opportunity to leave a legacy after 2021. So now the attention is there because we're gonna have Olympics. So now it's the best chance to do it. So that's the context of this report. That's my interpretation of the report, right? So,
I completely agree with you.
Thank you very much. We have one more question here, if you don't mind. It's from the correspondent for BBC in Turkey, BBC World Turkish. Can you elaborate on the sexual abuse of especially young female athletes, where the intention is definitely not educational? So this is a good point, isn't it? Some of the other coaches can get away with saying, well, this is tough love or this is part of the sport, but sexual abuse obviously cannot be explained away that way. And just as context, we did have that major scandal in America with Larry Nassar, who was systematically abusing gymnasts, wasn't he, for many years and wasn't caught. So it's not an exclusively Japanese problem, of course. Would you like to just comment on that last question?
Yeah, sure. Well, of course, there have been a lot of problems about the sexual harassment. But it is even more difficult for female athletes to say something about it. They feel it's kind of a shameful to say such kind of thing. So we really needed to encourage them to speak out. I think this is a really good timing to encourage them. Right. By having a really good remedial system. So the remedy is important. Right. So they have to be protected. They, of course, up until now, in order to do this, they needed to sacrifice their career, right? So, but we need to, establish a better protection system for them.
Yeah. I would add that out of the 381 survey respondents, 24 years and younger, we had 5 reports of sexual abuse.
So female athletes.
Yes. Okay. And then, compared to physical violence, the number is very little, and therefore our reports focused more on physical abuses. However, we believe that as Yamazaki-sensei said, that the sexual abuse is the most difficult abuse to report to. So we don't believe that, we do not know whether this number represents the reality on the ground. So we particularly believe that it is important to set up an independent administrative body to report abuses. if there is one independent and then effective body to report to, it will be much easier for sexual abuse survivors to report to. And then I believe that, like the case in the United States, I understand that the U.S. Center for Safe Sports is flooded with complaints, particularly on sexual abuses. I believe that there also in Japan, it will be more cases reported. Currently, the situation is very difficult for sexual abuse survivors to report.
Yeah,
Right.
just one thing. There is a problem, what we call a grooming problem. So they don't really want to, female young athletes don't want to believe that it's a sexual harassment, because they have a really close relationship with the coaches, and due to its intimacy, they don't want to believe, they are sexually harassed by coaches. So it makes it really difficult.
Right.
Yeah.
So there was another part to that question. It was by Ilgin Yolumaz, by the way. That's the name of the reporter. She also wonders if any of these coaches have ever been brought to justice. Has anybody been prosecuted in Japan?
Sexual abuse cases.
Any kind of abuse? Prosecuted?
abuse,
Yeah.
There are some cases where the abusive coaches were brought to justice and then punished. Criminally punished. However, for example, the very famous case, 2013 basketball player suicide case, that's the case which brought the Japanese government and then the sports organization to start reform, which we concluded that it was not successful. However, but that coach, I believe, got like 1 year and a half
Yep.
or something. Sentenced with a suspension of the sentence. So
Yep.
he didn't end up going to jail.
Right.
So it is like Kobayashi-san's case. The prosecutor dropped the cases, and then only very, very few cases can end up in the courts. But even in such a few cases, the punishment is very low, because I think that the judges are hesitant to really accuse the coach, because they also believe that the coaches do not have malicious intent.
Right.
Right. Well, thank you so much. Is it a very quick question? Yeah? It has to be really quick because we're out of time. Thanks.
確認ですけれども、小林様の件ですが、民事裁判を起こしたんでしょうか。
はい、起こしました。
賠償金の、はありました。
はい、ありました。
はい、わかりました。
はい
ありがとう。
So that was just a clarification question to confirm that Ms. Kobayashi did indeed have a civil suit and there was compensation issued within that case.
Well, すいません、どうぞ。
いいですか、一言。英語のホームページを私たちの会は持ってます。で、その中に過去のとにかく新聞記事に載っている死亡記事を見つけ出して、全部英訳してホームページにアップしてます。今53件アップしてますけれども、まだたくさんの死亡事故を見つけ出してアップしようと思ってます。で、私の息子の事例は特別なケースではなくって、じゃなきゃこんなに百何十人も死ぬわけないし、121人しか死んでいないんじゃなくって、記録があるのが残っているのが121人だけなんです。ですから海外からの力で子どもたちを、日本の子どもたち守っていただきたいと思います。
So to add one further point, on the homepage of the Japan Judo Accident Victims Association, Ms. Kobayashi-san's association, they have also translated all of different newspaper articles which refer to specific deaths of children within judo as well, translating them into English to post on the website to share that information. To date, they have posted 53 cases, and of course there are many, many more which they still are wanting to look into and ensure that this information can be shared as well. So her son's case is not any particular case out of the ordinary. There are 121 children who have died in such circumstances only since it has been, or only within which has been recorded. So this is not saying that there's only 121, but actually that there's 121 who have been recorded within this data. And therefore we hope that we can also bring upon the support or the attention of people from other countries as well in order to protect the children here in Japan.
Thank you very much. Well, I've just checked, and yeah, the Japan Judo Accident Victims Association website is it is in English, and it is regularly updated. The last post was the 20th of July. So thank you very much for pointing that out for people who are writing stories. Well, thanks so much. It's a disturbing topic, and I feel we could have given it a lot more time. And that extraordinary statistic, 121 children killed playing judo, I've never heard it before. It really is disturbing. So thanks so much to Kanai Doi, Japan Director of Human Rights Watch, an old friend of the club, of course. You've been in many times. Thanks so much. Keiko Kobayashi, Japan Judo Accident Victims Association. Takuya Yamazaki, sports lawyer, executive committee member of World Players Association, and we should not forget, of course, Mary Joyce there, toiling away at the other end of the table. Thanks so much, as always, for your smooth Rolls-Royce translation. It was wonderful as always. And as is our tradition, we award you honorary membership of the club, and we hope you'll come back maybe next year and update us on the situation. Thanks, Taku. Thank you very much.
Thank you. ありがとうございました。
Thank you.